The 25th flight of the Space Shuttle has taken off and it has gone over the tower. 9 nautical miles of height and 7 nautical miles of downrange distance. It was the worst accident in the history of the American space program, and President Reagan has declared a week of mourning for the 7 astronauts who died. 5 men and 2 women died on their way into space this morning. In 1986, the world was shocked by the tragedy of the Challenger explosion, which killed 7 amazing crew members. As a tribute to their sacrifice, President Reagan declared a week of mourning. Many people still don't know what happened to their bodies. Were they found again? Were they buried properly? Or did they get lost in the blast? Come with us as we find out these facts. First, let's meet the people who were on the Challenger before we get into what happened to their bodies. The brave people on the Challenger team. An important event happened on July 19, 1985, when committed schoolteacher Christa McAuliffe got a letter that would change her life and spark a national dream. Only McAuliffe was chosen from more than 11,000 teachers to be the first teacher in space. She felt overwhelmed by the size of this chance as she thought about how she could share the amazing things she saw in space with kids across the country when she got back. At first, the mission seemed like an important and exciting historical event, but soon the tragedy that was about to happen, which no one knew about at the time, took center stage. The news of McAuliffe's pick spread like wildfire, like an explosion in space, through Concord High School in New Hampshire and beyond. People who worked with McAuliffe, her family, friends, and children were filled with joy and pride. Understanding that her trip to space wasn't just a personal goal, but a source of inspiration for the whole country. As a key figure in the Teacher in Space project, McAuliffe wasn't just going to be a passenger on the Challenger, she was also going to teach live from space, inspiring kids all over the country. People were very excited because they thought that when McAuliffe got back, she would start a national lecture series that would make her famous as a supporter of science and technology education. McAuliffe and her respected crewmates, including Commander Francis R. Scobie, started a tough training program at the Johnson Space Center in Houston, Texas, to get ready for their historic journey. If there were any questions about the crew skills, they were clearly very qualified. Captain Scobie was a seasoned pilot who had already shown his mettle on STS-41C's dangerous flights. His co-pilot, Michael J. Smith, had a great deal of experience and had flown a lot of different kinds of planes. The team also had successful astronauts like Judith A. Resnick, who was a leader among female astronauts because of the innovative ways she helped NASA run its programs. Ellison S. Onizuka was the first Asian American astronaut, and Ronald E. McNair was the second African American to go into space. Both brought their own unique skills to the mission. Gregory B. Jarvis was the last member of the team, a payload expert whose job it is to do experiments for Hughes aircraft. This is his long-awaited debut in space after past setbacks. Each of them brought their own unique skills and successes to the mission. Even though they were very qualified, there were signs of trouble on the horizon, pointing to a tragic result that would eventually shake the country to its core. What was this terrible result and what caused it? Watch on to find out. The Space Shuttle Challenger, the Space Shuttle, which was run by NASA, was a huge step forward in space travel. When it took off for the first time in April 1981, it was a flexible platform that could be used for a variety of tasks, including military, commercial, and scientific ones, along with 2 solid rocket boosters, or SRBs. Because of how it was built, the shuttle could be used more than once. The launcher carried the crew and cargo. The winged orbiter took off vertically and landed like a glider. It had a cabin for the crew where they stayed and worked during missions. The shuttle's 3 main engines, or SMEs, were mounted at the back and gave it thrust during flight. 2 smaller orbital maneuvering system AMS engines made it easier to move around once it was in space. As part of its operational job, Challenger OV-099, the second orbiter built, was changed from a structural test article. However, the ship was constantly damaged by the harsh conditions of space travel, so repairs had to be done behind the scenes all the time to replace parts that were worn out. A lot of people didn't know that these cracks would finally cause a tragedy that could not be fixed. For years, the Challenger was a source of national pride. Sadly, some of the best pilots in the country would die on board. But the question remains, were there signs of the danger, or did the crew's lack of experience play a part? Let's look into it more to find out. Engineers on the Challenger spacecraft sent reports that were ignored that danger was about to happen. Even though they had been training hard for months, both the team and the country were looking forward to the launch date. But their dreams were quickly dashed on January 22, 1986, 6 days before the launch. A top NASA official broke the bad news in a training room that was filled with sadness. Their job would have to wait until another shuttle, 61C, came back. That shuttle had problems and wasn't supposed to land until the next day. It was easy to feel the sadness. Every space mission held immense significance, marking a culmination of dreams and aspirations even for seasoned astronauts. The call of the stars and the enticement of the unknown were strong motivators for everyone. For a team eager to make history, this small setback seemed like it went on for a very long time. As the day got closer, the crew of the Challenger waited impatiently in their rooms, eager for dawn to break and signal the start of their historic mission. But if someone thought they were about to start their trip into space, they were in for a shocking surprise. Worries about the weather and O-rings. As the launch date got closer, the team started to feel uneasy. An worried engineer went to their boss and told them they had serious doubts about how well the rocket seals would work in the cold. This constant worry kept casting a shadow over the mission, which was a scary sign of the darkness that would finally cover the whole thing. In fact, this was only one of many problems that were brought up about the spacecraft. A shaky voice had been going around the shuttle program for more than 2 years, making people nervous. Engineers and techs had warned many times that they were afraid of pushing the spacecraft too far. People thought the shuttles were amazing feats of engineering, but they also made people realize that even the toughest tools have their limits. The weather report for January 28th said that it would be the coldest ever for a space shuttle launch. Overnight temperatures were expected to drop to minus 18 degrees Fahrenheit, minus 8 degrees Celsius, and they were expected to rise to 22 degrees Fahrenheit, minus 6 degrees Celsius at 6 a.m. and 26 degrees Fahrenheit, minus 3 degrees Celsius by 9:38 a.m., which is the time the launch was supposed to happen. Because O-rings have worn down in the past during warmer launches, Morton Thiokol engineers were worried about how these cold temperatures might affect the solid rocket booster's SRB ability to lock. In order to talk about the launch's safety, Cecil Houston, who is in charge of the Marshall Space Flight Center office at Kennedy Space Center, set up a conference call for the evening of January 27th. During this call, Morton Thiokol engineers talked about how worried they were that the rubber O-rings might not connect properly during launch because they lose some of their elasticity when it gets cold. The engineers made it clear that they didn't have enough information to say for sure if the O-rings would work at temperatures lower than the previous coldest launch, which happened at 53 degrees Fahrenheit, 12 degrees Celsius. Morton Thiokol's Vice President of Engineering, Robert Lund, and Vice President of the Space Booster Programs, Joe Kilminster, said the launch should be put off until the temperature rose above 53 degrees Fahrenheit, 12 degrees Celsius. After a break for private talks among Morton Thiokol management, the call started up again with a different position from the company. The leaders of Morton Thiokol said that the information they had seen about O-ring failure was not clear-cut and that there was a large margin of safety in case of failure or erosion. Because of this, they decided to go ahead with the launch and sent in a suggestion for launch approval before the teleconference ended. Arnold Aldrich, who is in charge of NASA's mission management team, and Lawrence Malloy, who is in charge of the SRB project, talked about the launch choice and weather concerns. Surprisingly, Malloy didn't bring up the O-ring issue at all during their talk, and everyone agreed to go ahead with the launch. Even though worries were still there, they were pushed aside as the clock kept ticking away. As dawn rose on January 28, 1986, painting the Atlantic in orange tones, there were only 2 hours and 38 minutes left until danger struck. The launch. As the launch time got closer, a lot of people gathered around Cape Canaveral to watch. They included reporters from all over the world, people who lived in the area, and excited tourists who had come from far away to see this important event. This launch wasn't like any other. There was a chance to see history being made, especially since teacher Krista McAuliffe was on the Challenger team, which made a lot of people interested in the cause. Challenger was going on its 10th mission, and this was the 25th launch of the Space Shuttle. Because of its perfect track record, there was a lot of trust in the mission. With everyone waiting, the crowd below cheered as the scientists put on their spacesuits and got ready for the trip ahead. The excited people watched as they got out of the transport car and waved to them. Their steps were purposeful and determined. There was a lift ready to take them to the Challenger's cockpit, where they could make their last preparations. Back in Houston, Mission Control was very busy as hundreds of sensors on the spaceship sent a steady stream of data that was carefully checked and double-checked to make sure that the Challenger was in perfect working order. As the astronauts settled into their seats, their safety harnesses were tightened, and the hatch was sealed with a faint hiss. Commander Scobie and Pilot Smith did their final checks. There was a mix of excitement and stress in the air. They were worried and excited at the same time, because they were about to make a long-held dream come true. As people around the world watched in awe and expectation, the Challenger carried important scientific payloads such as the Spartan Halley spacecraft and the Tracking and Data Relay Satellite TDS-B, which was supposed to send important data. Sadly, though, these tests were not carried out as planned. There was also a delay in the space lift because of bad weather. After waiting for a while when the sky cleared and the wind died down, preparations began again. As the instruments and senses came to life, Commander Scobie and Pilot Smith carefully did their last checks. Mission Control's calm voice could be heard in the cockpit, counting down the seconds. 10, 9, and 8. The feeling of anticipation gave way to a sharp focus and attention. 7, 6, the main engine starts, indicating the start of the climb. The Challenger came to life with a rush of power. At 7:06, the main engine starts, and at 4:32:1, the plane takes off. When the solid rocket boosters caught fire, they made a huge noise that could be heard for miles and rattled windows and the ground. "All right," came over the speaker in the voice of astronaut Judy Resnick, even as a wave of joy went through the crowd below. By yelling "all systems go loud and clear," the intercom said that the Challenger started its trip with a fiery roar as the boosters caught fire. At 184 feet tall, it was a sign of how clever people can be when they reach for the stars. This successful launch was the start of a great year for the Challenger, which went on to complete 6 more flights that year. The Challenger broke free from its earthly bonds when 8 exploding bolts went off. Like a beautiful bird freed from its cage, it took off into the unknown, leaving a line of fire and smoke behind it as it flew through the sky. The incredibly sad crash. 73 seconds into its last flight, the Challenger let out a huge roar as its boosters caught fire. Mission Control heard the crew's calm words, but they didn't know what was going to happen. Suddenly, flames shot out of a damaged seal on the right booster, setting off a huge explosion. The thrill of the Challenger's first mission on April 4, 1983, was very different from this sad event. The Challenger's crash was the start of a hard time for those who had to find the bodies of the crew members. After the main engine started up at 10:04, which confirmed a good liftoff, everything seemed fine at first. But there was a strange silence going on behind the scenes, and a data blackout at 1025 caused worry, which was first thought to be caused by launch structures. Soon after launch, binoculars on the ground saw strange black smoke coming from the right solid rocket booster near an important O-ring seal. Even though this was a warning sign, neither the team nor Mission Control at first realized how bad things were. They didn't know it, but the black smoke was caused by hot gases leaking from an O-ring seal that was broken on launch day because of the cold. Routine tasks were done while the Challenger continued to rise, and there were no signs of approaching danger. Hugh Harris, a launch reporter, said that the shuttle had cleared the tower at 9:47, which gave people more false hope and temporarily made the troublesome smoke less noticeable. At 10:44, however, techs noticed a strange thing. The right booster had a slightly higher internal pressure reading. In the midst of the celebrations, this subtle clue pointed to approaching danger. Even so, the crew kept working on their jobs, not realizing that the weather was getting worse. At 11:08, Pilot Smith started a roll maneuver to get the Challenger ready for its mission. Sadly, they didn't notice the quiet countdown to disaster that was happening right in front of their eyes. The scary moment came at 11:27 a.m., just 19 seconds after takeoff. The mission went from being a dream to a nightmare. The Challenger shook very hard and lurched to one side with scary force. Pilot Michael Smith kept his cool, and with help from the guidance system, fought to take back control of the spaceship, which temporarily fixed its course. A glimmer of hope appeared at 11:43, when the team did what they were supposed to do and slowed down the main engines. For a moment, they felt like they were back in charge. It looked like the Challenger was back on track, racing in the direction it wants to go. But this break didn't last long. At 12:01, as the shuttle got close to 10,000 feet and the sound barrier, Commander Scobie gave a scary report. It was hard to see out of his window. They didn't know it, but this ominous warning meant that the fatal collapse was just seconds away. Even though they were in a zone of high air pressure, which is a standard part of the climb, all of their systems were still working normally at 1,219. Under this false appearance of normality, however, clouds of black smoke kept rising. At 12:53, there was a flash of light near the right wing that shook the crowd. It was the first spark of the fire that was about to start. Soon after, a huge orange fireball shot out from under the right wing. It was caused by the failed booster. Even more amazing is that the instrument data stayed within normal ranges for no apparent reason, hiding how bad the situation really was. The Challenger was hurtling toward destruction like a ticking time bomb, but its internal measures showed that it was stable, which gave the crew a false sense of security. At 13:28, just under a minute after taking off, the Challenger sped up to over 1,500 miles per hour, which is very fast. As time kept ticking away, Commander Scobie carefully started a throttle down, which was a normal thing to do as the spaceship rose. At 14:46, the Challenger went through the area with the highest aerodynamic pressure. During this time, a crucial O-ring seal in the rocket failed catastrophically. This was the turning point that set off a scary chain of events. The broken seal caused flames to spread to the right side of the ship. It's possible that the crew faced the grim truth of their situation for the first time at this point, 73 seconds into their doomed trip. They were once hoping to go into space, but quickly their dream turned into a desperate fight for life, and sadly they would not win. What happened next shows what a brave crew they were in the face of impending danger. In a last-ditch effort to regain control, they started the emergency processes and tried to speed up the failing engines. There was no way to save the Challenger, though. It was a ship that was doomed to fail. By the 74-second mark, the crew probably came to a sad reality. The crew cabin, which was made of reinforced metal, separated from the rest of the orbiter without any damage. It went in a ballistic path and reached its highest point about 25 seconds after the explosion, about 65,000 feet 20 kilometers above the Earth's surface. The cabin went through a maximum acceleration that was thought to be between 12 and 20 times the force of gravity g. The acceleration fell below 4g in just 2 seconds, and the capsule was in freefall in just 10 seconds. It's possible that the forces used during this phase weren't strong enough to seriously hurt the crew. There is evidence that at least some of the crew was still alive and alert after the ship broke up. Pilot Smith and 2 other crew members who were not named had their personal egress air packs PAPEs engaged, but Commander Scobie's were not. Smith's PEP, which is on the back of his seat, was triggered, which meant that either Resnick or Onizuka probably did it for him. Looking into the PEP's leftover unused air supply was in line with what was expected to be used during the post-breakup trajectory. When detectives looked at the wreckage, they saw that some of the electrical system switches on Smith's right-hand panel were not where they should have been during launch. Some of these switches had lever locks that had to be taken off before they could be changed. Tests done later showed that the explosion's force or the impact with the ocean could not have moved them. Based on these clues, it looks like Smith tried to change the switches, probably in a vain attempt to get power back to the pilot. After the crew cabin broke away from the rest of the spacecraft, finding the dead bodies. The unthinkable force and impact of the Challenger's crash into the ocean sealed the fate of the people on board. This violence mostly hit the crew cabin, which was completely destroyed by the high pressure and speed. From the start, search teams knew that it would be impossible to find bodies that were still whole. After the accident, there was a huge search and recovery operation that lasted for 3 months. As soon as the tragedy happened, NASA's launch recovery director sent the MV Freedom Star and MV Liberty Star, 2 SRB recovery ships, to the impact area to pick up debris. Support was also asked from U.S. armed ships and planes. Since the explosion caused things to fall, recovery forces couldn't go near the impact spot until 12:37 p.m. As the operation went on, more people joined the search and rescue efforts. By 7 p.m., 12 planes and 8 ships were involved. The main goal of surface operations was to get debris out of the orbiter and external tank. On February 7th, the surface rescue operations came to an end. The U.S. Navy started submarine recovery operations with the Wright SRB as the first thing to be recovered. The crew section and other payload parts came next. Formal search for debris began on February 8th, led by the rescue and recovery ship USS Preserver and including 16 other ships. The first search was done by these boats using side-scan sonar. The water depths range from 70 to 1,200 feet and cover an area of 486 square nautical miles. Sonar operations found 881 possible sites for debris, and 187 of them were proven to be from the orbiter. Even though the found material was broken up and crushed, it showed how hard the impact was. On March 7th, Air Force divers found what they thought was crew room debris. Later, divers from the USS Preserver confirmed what they had seen. A look inside the crew room showed that it had mostly stayed together during the first explosion, but it had taken a lot of damage when it hit the water. Sadly, the crew's bodies were badly damaged by both impact and submersion, so they could not be recovered whole. Because the found material was broken up, it wasn't useful for things like fingerprints or dental records. Even with these problems, experts kept working and were able to identify the bodies of all 7 crew members in the end. But because the damage was so bad, it was hard to say for sure what killed any of them. The USS Preserver was also very important in several trips to bring debris and bodies back to port, where crew compartment recovery efforts will continue until April 4th. Sadly, while the crew's bodies were being recovered, Jarvis' body slid off and wasn't found again until April 15th, several weeks after the other bodies had been positively identified. Pathologists from the Armed Forces Institute of Pathology worked hard to figure out who the bodies belonged to. Problems arose when medical examiners in Brevard County questioned whether it was acceptable to send bodies to U.S. military officials for autopsies and refused to sign death certificates. In the end, NASA officials did something that had never been done before they released the crew members' death records. The recovery efforts also yielded important findings linked to the spacecraft's components. One of the first pieces of space junk found was the inertial upper stage IUS, which was meant to boost the orbit of the TDRS-B satellite. It was surprising that there was no sign of the IUS starting up too early, which was one of the things that was thought to have caused the accident. It was found between February 14th and February 28th. An analysis done afterward showed a situation that fit with engines suddenly losing their LH2 fuel supply. Rescue operations in deep water went on until April 29th, and rescue operations in shallow water on a smaller scale went on until August 29th. On December 17, 1996, a very important finding was made. When at Cocoa Beach, 2 pieces of the orbiter were found. Next, on November 10, 2022, NASA said that a 20-foot piece of the shuttle had been found near the site of a crashed WWII plane off the coast of Florida. On November 22, 2022, this finding was shown on the History Channel. Most of the non-living debris from the Challenger that has been found is buried in missile bases at LC-31 and LC-31, LC-32 at Cape Canaveral Space Force Station. Response from NASA after the terrible accident, NASA took strong steps to make the Space Shuttle program safer and more reliable. The redesign of the solid rocket boosters was an important part of this project. The rethink was carried out with the help of an independent oversight group. One important change that made the joint better was adding a feature to the tang that captures the inside wall of the clevis. This is meant to stop the joint from rotating. These improvements make it much less likely that the joint will rotate, which lowers the risk of the O-ring seal failing. Also, heaters were put in to keep the O-rings at higher temperatures all the time, which improved their performance and dependability even more. In addition to the SRBS, NASA made sure that all parts of the Space Shuttle program met strict safety standards. Notably, an escape route was added that let astronauts throw the side hatch away and stretch a pole outside the orbiter. They were able to slide down the pole and stay safe. As they bailed out before setting off their parachutes, they reduced the chance of an impact with the orbiter. In 1986, NASA created a new Office of Safety, Reliability, and Quality Assurance based on suggestions from the commission that was looking into what happened. These bold steps showed that NASA was serious about improving safety rules and keeping the Space Shuttle program honest, showing a thorough way of dealing with the lessons learned from the Challenger accident, death and bequest. The astronauts' bodies were taken from Kennedy Space Center to the military morgue at Dover Air Force Base in Delaware on April 29, 1986, by a C-141 Starlifter plane. Each of their coffins was wrapped in an American flag and had an honor guard and an astronaut escort with it. When the bodies got to Dover Air Force Base, they were given to the families of the crew members. Each person has a different final resting place. Smith and Scobie were buried at Arlington National Cemetery. Onizuka, on the other hand, was buried at the National Memorial Cemetery of the Pacific in Honolulu, Hawaii. Restlawn Memorial Park in Lake City, South Carolina, was where McNair was buried before it was moved to the Doctor. Ronald E. McNair Memorial Park in the same town. Resnick's body was burned, and her ashes were spread out in the water, while McAuliffe was buried in Concord, New Hampshire at Calvary Cemetery. Jarvis's ashes were also burned and spread out in the Pacific Ocean. Crew members whose bodies have not been recognized were buried at the Space Shuttle Challenger Memorial in Arlington on May 20th, 1986. There is only one grave marker which will always be there to remember them and honor their effort as a crew. During this difficult time, privacy for the families of the pilots who died was given top priority. The Challenger accident had a huge effect on the country. All 7 astronauts' names are on a memorial at Arlington National Cemetery so that their bravery will always be remembered. The fact that they are buried together shows that they were a team, and their souls will always be linked and flying among the stars. The memory of the Challenger crew will live on in the history of space travel, even though they are no longer with us. Please say something kind about these brave people in the comments part to honor them. Thanks for seeing this movie. We hope you had fun. Click on the link that appears to learn more about other events that happened in real life. I'll see you there.